Kevin, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. No, it's a pleasure and an honor. It's a great opportunity. We look forward to the chat.
Yeah, it's definitely under different circumstances. Last time I was chatting with you was in person in Manhattan in your incredible office. We were there with part of a team from Young Enterprise to basically
That's right.
learn from guys like you. And so that feels like many moons ago. That was pre-COVID. And so delighted to have a chance to reconnect and chat on this platform.
No, it's fantastic. And I was trying to remember back to exactly when that was, but I do recall it was during the summer. Of course, it would have been during one of our global summits, and so we had all of our folks convened in New York from the four corners of the earth. And I was a bit apprehensive. I'll bring all these good young entrepreneur folks in. God knows what's happening in the office at any given time. It was pure mayhem during these summits. But you don't seem too scarred from the experience, so that's good.
Yeah, exactly. And just to paint the picture for people, if you think about New York offices, that's exactly what it was. It was a lot of energy going on. There was all this kind of lunch being served across the place. And you were like, it's not always like this, I
It's,
promise. And I was like, I bet you it's usually like this.
we're required to say that as part of our employment conditions. So yeah,
So Kevin is the managing director of a New York-based global advisory firm called Teneo. He has had this unbelievable career, literally all over the world. He also was a member of the Foreign Service of the US State Department. Your connection to Northern Ireland, tell me a little bit about that.
yeah. I had the honor and pleasure of serving at the U.S. consulate in Belfast from 2009 to 12. First as the political counselor there, so working very closely with all of your statutory bodies and political parties and civil society organizations, among others, and finished up there as the acting consul general as well. So, yeah, it was a fantastic time for both myself and the family, professionally, personally, and it was also a break from many years in the Middle East Africa region. So it was a really nice opportunity to spend time there, and it was an interesting time as well. 2009 to 12, there was a fair amount going on, and
Mm,
on the political side, on the economic side. So yeah, no, really enjoyable time.
it's great. Yeah, I'm just looking at the list here. Iraq, Egypt, Tunisia, South Africa, Jordan. It's like, man, you've been everywhere. And if I remember right, you're fluent?
Well, I guess it depends who you talk to. I like to say I'm a little bit rusty. No, but I did study Arabic. I studied classical Arabic, modern standard, and a few of the dialects as well over the years. Courtesy of Uncle Sam. And I spend a lot of time these days too back in the region and in Dubai at the moment. So get the opportunity to dust it off every so often. But yeah,
Class. And just before we kind of launch in, if you were to explain Teneo to someone who has no grasp of that consulting world, like what is it that you guys do? Why do people pay you money to do it?
that is a really good question, and I'm not sure. No, if I don't have an answer for that. Today it's a global advisor, the CEO advisory firm, and I think really what that means is you take all of the disciplines of business advisory, management consulting, strategic communications, financial advisory, risk advisory, people advisory, in terms of placing C-suite executives in their roles. You kind of bring all of that together and execute that through, the view of a CEO. I mean, the CEO, she or he is sitting at the top of a highly complex organization, is facing down geopolitical issues, market issues, turmoil in the macroeconomic situation, all of those kinds of things. And the CEO is kind of looking at the world from a very unique and sometimes a very lonely place. And Teneo was conceived back in 2011. It was conceived a little bit before that, but it was launched in 2011, actually by a former U.S. Special Envoy to Northern Ireland, Declan Kelly. Um,
Wow.
to really fill that gap where traditional management consulting, traditional advisory services, traditional, strategic communication services, weren't assisting the CEOs of kind of today and tomorrow in the way that they, providing the type of help that they really needed. So it was a unique take on advisory, and we're still doing that to this day.
Great. I mean, one of the things that stands out to me from meeting you in Manhattan that time was, okay, here's this guy, right? Works in New York, somehow lives in Ireland. Could you walk us through that? Because I actually have relayed this story to lots of people. It's like, you think your commute's bad? Wait to hear
Yeah,
this.
yeah, no, it's we've kept since, I guess, going back to, was it 2003 or thereabouts? We've kept our family home in the west of Ireland, very very small village in the north of County Clare, a place called Quay in the Burren region, southern shore of Galway Bay. It's a fantastically beautiful spot if anybody ever has the opportunity to head out that way. And it was one of those things. We've had, connections there for a very long time. I'd spent some time over there when I was a student. I was interning actually at the U.S. Embassy in Dublin in 1995, and I was over in the West Coast. I had family connections out there. But to make a very long story short, after I had joined the Foreign Service, my wife and I, who we'd gotten married very young, and we actually were very fortunate to have bought a tiny little house very young as well in Baltimore.
How young is young? Go on, tell me.
About 2 weeks after my 22nd birthday. Yeah. So,
nice.
So, and we,
when you know,
when you know. Well, I knew, I'm not sure whether she knows yet, but, we'll maybe get to that. No, but yeah, no, we had the good fortune and opportunity, had a tiny little house that we bought in Baltimore, and then got overseas and I realized that I was going to be spending the rest of my life overseas, most likely. So we were able to kind of sell that house after a couple of years, and we had a piece of land up there that we were able to acquire and build a house, and knowing that was going to be our boat toll. And I said, this would be a fantastic place, to raise the kids, and kind of where the world was going at that time as well in terms of the geopolitical situation, and myself kind of being focused on the Middle East. I knew that I'd be spending some time away from the family during the Foreign Service, right? And whether that be in Iraq or elsewhere. So I wanted a place, we wanted a place in a fantastic community and that was safe and welcoming to the family, and where my wife and kids could stay if I had to be away for an extended period. So that's we kind of ended up there. And then we were finally able to transition after I left the Foreign Service and joined Teneo. After a couple of years of establishing our office in the Middle East, I was able to kind of transition to, I don't want to say work from home because I was never home, but remote work before it was fashionable, before COVID. So my P&L, as we would say, my cost center, my seat was in New York for the most part between there, and we have an office in Dublin as well. But I was on the road 180 to 250 days a year, whatever it might have been.
Sure, yeah.
Traveling around servicing clients and working with my colleagues around the world. So yeah, so that's a home. We've been back there for a good long time now. The kids kind of went through school there or going through, but my youngest is still going through school there. So that's the long version of it, although there's lots of other anecdotes along the way of how we got there. But yeah, it's a wonderful spot. Absolutely beautiful place.
This episode is part of our ongoing series with NI Connections, where we interview an interesting person from Northern Ireland who's living and/or working overseas. Now, who are NI Connections? They are the diaspora department of Invest NI, and their mission is really, really simple. It's to connect the Northern Irish community all around the world. They put together some really incredible resources, including how to move you and your family back home if you have been living overseas, how to move to Northern Ireland for the first time, and even how to move your business or open up a new branch in this wonderful place that we call home. You'll also can find hundreds of interviews and profiles with fascinating people who are proud to call this place home, and you can check out all of these things and sign up for their free email newsletter at niconnections.com. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's episode. So, I mean, this is endlessly fascinating to me. You kind of, in some ways, had pickings of anywhere in the world, okay, to set up your home base as such. And you have experience of traveling to lots of different countries as well. Why Ireland? You talk about that family side. What was it about this place that you were like, yeah, let's dig our roots in here rather than nearly anywhere else in the world?
Well, it's for me, and I just keep going back to community, and it's the neighbors, it's the folks down the street, it's the small businesses, it's the pub, it's the church, the school, the things that make up a community. And again, that's not just in rural Ireland. I mean, you see that, you still see that in the urban areas and elsewhere. People have obviously very strong connections to community. And I thought, I grew up in one place, right? In Southside Baltimore, and although we moved when I was young from the city to slightly just on the edge of the city, um, that was the big migration for me there. But my kids, my son was born in South Africa when I was based down there. My daughter was born in Ireland, actually, but we were based in Egypt at the time, and they had moved all over the place. I think my son had lived in 6 or 7 countries by the time he was 12 years old. And, we wanted to make sure that they weren't condemned to a peripatetic life or to a life on the move, and to make sure that they felt what being part of a community was all about, to include, what the responsibilities you have to your community, showing up, participating in community life. And so that was really the thing. I mean, they lived in some of the, we lived in Cairo with 22 million people, and then they go from there to, 127 person village, right? So, it's just it's the people, it's the interpersonal connections. It's, being around folks and, hopefully making a positive difference in the community as well. I mean, both myself and my wife have tried to be helpful and active, and, but I think the community's given back tenfold, to whatever we've put in. And, I think that's something I wanted the kids to experience. You can experience that anywhere in the world, I'm sure, to a degree, but for us, that was the place. And, we felt that, we had found home.
I mean, from what I've even heard today, never mind the sheet of paper in front of me, it seems like service is something that's very, very important to you. If you take us back to kind of like childhood, teenage days, upbringing, parents, all that sort of stuff, where does that sense of, I'm trying to avoid the word duty, but that's the word that's in my head. You seem to be, for you, life, it's important how much you give rather than, yeah, let's just make everything easy and I'm just going to set up this sweet life and, I'm not going to be flying, not going to be doing this. Where does that come from in you?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably pretty selfish. I think I still am in a lot of ways. So it's always a wonder to me as well. No, I think it's just the example of others. My parents, growing up, I think it was one of those situations where they worked very, very hard. I probably didn't realize it at the time what it took to pay the mortgage and to move us to the area where they did, so my older siblings could go to better schools and we'd have better opportunities. I think I took all that for granted, certainly. But the idea of that kind of stick-to-itiveness, of
Yes.
working hard, can't remember my father ever taking a sick day in 40 years, aside from when he had to have surgery or something like that. And even then, he would have rushed it back to work, and he had a tough job. So I think there's that.
What was this job?
He worked for Delta Airlines for 40 years and kind of the operations side of things, and out on the ramp and out there. I think my mom blames that for him losing his hearing. So I think he's just has selective hearing loss. But anyway, I mean, it was one of those things that you're out there. I mean, a lot of family members and friends and neighbors and others that worked hard. And folks that were involved in other kinds of service. Again, whether it was to their country with the military, or whether it was in the community. And I just think I saw a lot of those examples. And again, I was too concerned about sports or whatever, all these other kinds of things to probably think about it as much. But I think on reflection, it did kind of shape at least the environment that I wanted my kids to experience. And I think it did shape an inclination towards public service, and then an inclination in the private sector, to be in a position to, help people, help companies, help others kind of navigate, complex situations and try and work for good outcomes. And so I think that's it was just the example of others, really. And I think they're out there in all of our communities, and that's where I continually feel drawn back to that.
Yeah. So dad's spending his working life watching airplanes all day.
Well, I mean, they were loading airplanes. He was also probably, was in the inside as well. They did everything. It's the airlines themselves did everything in those days. It wasn't contracted out, I remember. So we might be inside, but the ticket counter down into the ramp area. And it's funny. It's one of my
cool role. Yeah.
So they were, the tugged, and as a kid, I kind of spent a lot of time in the airport. I was trying to remember.
Yeah.
There was a few situations. I'm not sure exactly the sequence of events that would have led to my dad taking me with him to work when I was a toddler. I think, my mom was at work and one of the grandparents or aunts or whoever wasn't around to mind me as the youngest. Um, so I'd end up in the work, sitting out there, in the back of a tug, watching them load the airplane and fuel the airplane. It was one
Wow.
of those things like, can you imagine a kid being allowed, to the international airport with all the stuff that's going on there? But yeah, you see that. You see what people do. You see people. It's tangible work
Mm,
as well, which is funny because I ended up in a career, two careers, both in diplomacy and in business, where oftentimes tangible results aren't evident right away. You don't see the sum total of
sure.
your efforts um, on an hourly basis anyway. But yeah, just seeing those examples and seeing, being around, that kind of environment was good.
Yeah. So did you have a desire to travel? Did you have a desire to go overseas as a youngster, for lack of a better term? Or
Yeah.
did the career pull you in that direction? What came first,
So yeah,
basically,
we
is what I'm
didn't,
trying to ask.
I didn't travel overseas until I think it was 14 or 15. Actually, I think my father, his Delta had bought Pan Am, had acquired Pan Am Airlines. I forget exactly what year it was, but he was sent over to Germany to help kind of train their operations staff on how to manage the Delta procedures. So he was working in Frankfurt Airport, and we had friends that were in the Army, U.S. Army, that were stationed in Germany, and I went over there, and as a young teenager, and it was just a whole new world. I was absolutely fascinated. And they gave me the freedom to just taking the subway around Munich and doing all these kinds of things and popping up here and there and
Awesome.
getting locked in pay toilets and trying to figure out all these things that I'd never seen before and done before. It's something that really stuck with me. We traveled within the U.S. As a kid, and one of the benefits of working, I guess, in those days with the airlines was you got discounted travel or travel passes. So we went, and my parents are both very intellectually curious people. They love the outdoors. They love national parks and all of those kinds of things. And we always had encyclopedias around the house and National Geographic and all of that. So when we had opportunities, we'd use that privilege of working for the airline to be able to go out and go to, Arizona or go to all these exotic places within the U.S. But I had never traveled internationally until teenager. But I was hooked. And at that point, I loved history. I loved geography, all of those kinds of things. But once I got out and kind of experienced um, that feeling of otherness in a way, being in a different culture, being in a different place, experiencing, similar but different, what could be modes of transport, could be different foods or whatever it was. I knew I was pretty much hooked at that stage. So, by the time
Mm.
I ended up in university, I was studying international relations and language and economics, international economics, and all those kinds of things. I think I'd set the path at that stage.
Interesting. So you were kind of perplexed or awestruck by that otherness. And then you proceeded to pick up skills that allowed you to blend into those places as much as possible.
Yeah, I guess blend in. I mean, at 6'5",
As,
blue eyes, it's
as
hard to
much as you
hard
can.
to blend in a lot of the places. But yeah, no, I think the skills you pick up and what they allow you to do is at least to ask the right questions, to put yourself out there, to be, in a humble spirit, of course, to engage with people. And I think, the language, just the effort. And again, imagine, I went out to Jordan in 1999, and my first job at the embassy there, we had a fantastic ambassador, William Burns. He's the director of the CIA now, actually, in the U.S. But he was my first ambassador out there in Jordan, and one of my roles was,
That's kind of a crazy connection. Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
just
But
to kind of
he
like
was
highlight that.
he was a mentor and a all-star. I mean, one of our top diplomats ever. He was our ambassador to Russia. He was the deputy secretary of state, among other things. I worked for him as a staff assistant when I went back to Washington. He was head of the Middle East division with the State Department. I mean, real thoughtful, incredible diplomat, wonderful person, father, husband, just a really, a great role model in so many ways. But I think, one of my jobs first was out there was it was an internal political portfolio. I was a political officer, so part of my day-to-day was to liaise with the domestic political establishment. And in Jordan, which is a monarchy of the kingdom, but you still, at least you have a parliament, but that parliament generally represents the various tribal affiliations, So I was going out there with just enough Arabic to get me in trouble. At that stage, having done kind of 6-month intensive full immersion Arabic in Washington. And I get out there and I realized very, very quickly that the fact that a Westerner, that an American, for whatever the reason, was even making the attempt to engage with the people in their language on their terms, as a guest, of their hospitality and visiting them, it was very, very powerful. And again, this is, as some might be aware, U.S. policy in the Middle East has not always been the most popular in a lot of places. And I don't mean to even make light of it. It's just, it is what it is. But, I think, I also learned then, particularly we could talk about the Middle East in general. And I know you've had other guests who live in the region and spend a lot of time traveling there. The welcome, that human connection, regardless of political issues, regardless of all the other things that were going on outside the door. That welcome I received was moving. I'm still moved by it today. Regardless of all the other things that are happening, how you can be welcomed into someone's home and made to feel part of that family. And I think that attempt at language, that attempt to humble myself, because I was horrible, in terms of my pronunciation, in terms of my vocabulary, whatever. But I think those attempts are well rewarded. And you probably see that on holiday if you go to wherever. You might go to Spain, you might go to wherever it may be. But any attempt, to engage in a different culture on their terms to the extent that you can, I think is welcomed and rewarded.
Yeah, big time. What does Colin Powell and the King of Jordan mean?
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of, it's some of the stories. We get asked to tell a lot of stories. And Jordan was my first posting. I think I did 7 postings, but there's, you're always learning, in those things. And again, we have all these preconceived notions about what diplomacy is, and it's, the UN, and it's people negotiating across the table, and it's, the high issues of policy and all these kinds of things. But I think, one of the things that diplomats do most of the time is basically prepare for visit. But often that's what we do in terms of, visiting dignitaries, or I'm sure our friends at the U.S. consulate in Belfast earlier in the year with President Biden visiting, could agree with what I'm saying here, is that we spend a lot of time preparing the mechanics for visits, preparing, setting the stage for things to get done when the dignitaries meet one another. And a lot of that, there was logistical planning, and, there's logistical elements to this, there's security elements to this, there's all of that. And kind of it was 2000. So it would have been after the end of the Clinton administration. Bush administration comes in, Colin Powell, actually a disputed election in 2000, as some people might remember. So which delayed the formation of the new administration, but eventually Colin Powell he's appointed Secretary of State and is confirmed, and he's out doing his visits of kind of, key U.S. partners and allies, and Jordan was one of them. So I was given the task to help organize this visit, and it was a relatively short visit. There'd be several meetings, but very important meetings, and he was meeting with the king out at the Royal Palace. So you think of the orchestration of these kinds of meetings, you think of the motorcades as well. There's 20 cars and lots of guys carrying guns and security and all these other kinds of things, and press in tow, and all of this going on. So things, you work very closely for weeks on end before any meeting to get that choreography right with the host country protocol and with their security and all of those kinds of things. So anyway, long story short, we get there and meetings going very, very well. They're talking about all of the key issues. It's very cordial. It's very warm. And I think, which is the thing you really want to happen. Politics and diplomacy, just like business, is done between human beings. And that matters as much, if not more, than the facts, if you will, or some of the other issues that are out there, or the policies or whatever. It's that human connection. So anyway, this is all going very well. We're all preparing to leave. So we've got Secretary Powell is heading off to the military airport. The king is flying somewhere else. So out in front of the palace, we have 2 huge motorcades. You can imagine, there's 20 some cars from our motorcade. There's motorcade for the king to get ready to go. And there's palace security and military security and the king's bodyguard and everybody else going out there. But we all know what's supposed to happen. They're gonna leave the meeting room. They're gonna walk out on the steps. They're gonna shake hands, take the photos. Secretary Powell's gonna get in his limousine. It's gonna take off. King's gonna get in his, and it's gonna take off in its other way, and we're gonna go. But what happened at the end of the meeting? They're both car guys, right? It just turns out, because again, interpersonal conversations. The king had just gotten, I forget exactly what model it was, and I'm sure some of the listeners would have, in those around 2000, there was a new Mercedes. It was his armored limb. It was a V12 engine, right? So that's 500 V12. So they start talking about this at the end of the meeting, and Secretary Powell he's so excited. He's like, well, can I see this on the way out? And immediately, I know Ambassador Burns, myself, and some of the others start kind of rubbing our head, thinking, oh, there's going to be something always happens, by the way, that screws up your choreography.
Yeah, the perfect plan.
The perfect plan.
Just want everything to go so.
Life lesson. It's something will always. Again, these are human beings. People say, it's hard to work with kids and animals. Well, that goes beyond, But they're talking about this car. So we go out and okay, they're going to shake hands, and pictures are taken. The king says, do you want to check it out? Secretary Powell says, of course. So they go down. The king ushers his driver out of the way, opens the door, jumps in, and Colin Powell comes around, and Secretary Powell, again, he was the highest ranking military official in the U.S. He's the Secretary of State. He gets around into the passenger side, front seat. I don't think he's ridden in the front seat in a very long time, aside from his own personal car. They latch in, and they were saying, oh, God, okay, what's happening to the king? What's going on? And they're talking. He's showing them all the bells and whistles and all this kind of stuff like that. So then the doors open. We say, okay, thank goodness. Now they're going to proceed now and get in. Well,
yeah, there's no need for speed.
No need for
around the
speed.
streets.
Okay, fine.
Goodness.
Let them get back.
Yeah.
Okay, the plan is now going to resume. They'll go their separate ways. What happened? Secretary Powell comes around, gets into the driver's side. King Abdullah gets into the passenger side, and they take off.
Oh no!
Out the front
Colin,
gate.
what are you doing?
So people standing there. So you see people diving into cars, to catch up. The Jordanian Royal Guard and the military security folks and everybody scrambling very quickly to say, okay, because they decided, the king said, well, why don't you drive us to the airport? Okay, Secretary said, this is great. So he takes off. And again, around that time in 2000, there was significant security threat around the visit. We had a kind of enhanced package there at the time, among other things. But it was funny because we all just dive in and say, well, this is the way it's going to go. We're going to get to the airport one way or the other. And it all went well. I think the Jordanian security got out ahead and kind of boxed him in, so he couldn't use the full 12-cylinder, power of the thing. And they get to the airport and they say their farewells. And the king actually was hopping into his helicopter to fly off that he was flying himself. And we loaded Secretary Powell and his party onto, there was a waiting plane, and they took off and went to their next thing. But it was just one of those situations where, I learned, that was my first tour, and I'm learning very quickly, okay, you plan for everything, but then what you haven't planned for is going to happen. You just need to be flexible and let it, just hope that it goes.
Yeah, it's not often that Murphy's Law manifests itself in such a fun way.
Exactly. It was funny, actually. I think one of the reporters, because the Secretary of State often travels with, much like the president, but with a smaller contingent, but he often travels with press. And I think they asked him at the time, so how did it drive? What did you think of your run to the airport? And he said, I was basically kind of upset that the car got in front of me, so I really couldn't open her up, But yeah,
it's crazy. I mean, I know sports are really important to you, but I love kind of like that. Like one of the first lessons you learn from a good coach is you always play to the whistle.
Yes.
So if something bad happens, you don't turn around, you don't like put your hands up and say, what, this is not fair. It's like, no, like until the whistle blows, you have to keep playing.
And I think there's a lot of focus nowadays. I've seen, on stoicism and things like that. If there's an obstacle, good, perfect. Let's just deal with it. Let's just attack. And again, fortunately, that was a minor one. It was a humorous one. It wasn't at the time, especially for the diplomatic security folks and others who, again, given that they're pretty attuned to the threat environment and other things out there, and those kinds of, we use an American football term. When you call an audible like that, the security guys generally aren't that enthusiastic about it. But worked out well in the end.
Yeah, crazy. So, okay, that was your first posting.
Yeah.
Is that the terminology you guys
Yeah,
use?
we use posting, I guess, if it's more than kind of a visit. If you're there for a year, multiple years, we call it a posting. Yeah.
Cool. So that was your first posting. Dealer's choice, right? We're going to slowly, I'll give you the big picture. We're going to slowly make our way through some dominoes into the private sector.
Yeah.
So whatever you think is most relevant, let me know.
Sure. Yeah. I just, that was for me though, that got me hooked on the region in a way as well. I mean, I think, again, one other thing, and we talk about human connections, that's also too, again, where I not just in my kind of daily interactions, I played, in Jordan, I was still playing rugby. I played basketball. I played on a sponsored kind of Jordanian basketball team. I was the only American on the team. And,
dude, that's epic.
Yeah, it was great fun. And it was sponsored by a local restaurant. And, it was just great. And we played tournaments. We played all around. And basketball is huge there, actually. And, in Palestine and Jordan and in Lebanon, also, it's a popular sport. But around that time, so I think it was late September, early October 2000, things kind of really erupted in the West Bank and in Jerusalem and between Israel and Palestine. And I think Ariel Sharon, who was Israeli prime minister at the time, had visited had gone up into the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, and kind of the reaction to that just kicked off what was called the Second Intifada. So there was a very, very, very tense time. And there was uprising within a number of the Palestinian refugee camps in Jordan and elsewhere. And I remember we had a game scheduled against the Wehdat camp, which is one of the very large camps there, Palestinian refugee camps there in Jordan. And, I can't remember whether I forgot to talk to our security officer about it or whatever the situation was. We were playing in that camp. This is, there had been mass protests in the streets, and they tried to march on the embassy, the U.S. embassy, among other things. And anyway, I decided to play and to go. And at this time, at the height of tension there at the time, and people were and again, given the situation, I won't go too deep into the broad history, and I'm sure I know folks in Belfast are very well aware of the situation there and the conflict there and everything like that. But I remember I was with our team and went into to play with Haddad in the camp in the gym that they were using. And, I was kind of going and saying, yeah, they have every right to me to just say, yeah, leave him at the door. Right. Or what's he doing here? Kind of type thing. And I never forget, I was absolutely welcomed in and kind of, with full hospitality, and we played great. I think we lost or whatever the situation was. But I think I got so much out of that because, at the height of tension, I was welcomed as a human being. I think I put myself in their hands, into their hospitality. And, I think that was appreciated as well. Frankly, they knew that I was probably out of my comfort zone, in that situation, that particular time. But I was very well looked after. And again, that was a lesson very early on too, that, you need to step out of your box and, put yourself sometimes at the disposal of others, and with a humble heart, and, see what happens. And, that for me, it was just a lesson that I tried to carry on to next postings and to elsewhere. I mean, we went on in the State Department. They tend not to, in your first two tours, they like to give you two different geographies and different roles. So I went to South Africa next in Pretoria, which again was fascinating. Again, you think about reconciliation, you think about conflict, you think about where we were. And in 2001, you're only, 7 years on from democracy in South Africa. And there was a lot obviously still going on there at the time. The U.S. is from its previous policies, elsewhere is always in a very tricky spot there, with the various sides of the political debate there. But we had a lot of very strong interests there. And, again, you're putting yourself in that situation where I'd never been to Africa. I didn't, I had no experience there. I hadn't studied that. That wasn't my area of study in foreign relations in terms of the situations. But, so it was my job though to get on the ground and to meet people and to learn and to understand. And on one hand, advocate on behalf of the U.S., but on the other hand, it was my job to really get a sense of what was going on and trying to be helpful to that situation. Where we were. I mean, that was at the the near height of the AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, it was a really challenging time for the country, and it finds itself in continuously challenging times, including now. But it was again, learning lessons. We went on from there. I went back to Washington. I think was it yesterday was the 22nd anniversary, 9/11. That happened when I was in South Africa. Cut my tour short there to go back to Washington to work in what we called the Bureau, the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau for Ambassador Burns as a staff assistant there. There was so much obviously going on, and then the war in Iraq and all those things were starting to happen then, and or the preparations for that, or the war had already started. I think the invasion already happened at that stage. So, it just kind of get thrown into these issues, and then from there your kind of career carries you.
Yeah.
Over there on to go do more Arabic, advanced Arabic in Tunis, and onto roles in Cairo, which was one of our largest embassies in the region. Obviously a very important country, for a lot of reasons, during a time that was building up to a tumultuous time. And this will get us actually to how I ended up in the private sector. But finished up Cairo, then was in Baghdad.
Dude, you're killing it. You're just maneuvering this whole interview. I'm just going to go get a cup of tea and you just keep going.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's just, you need like an electric shock button to turn, just kind of whenever you need to shut me down, just go ahead and press
There's
it.
one to send out as an onboarding package for all the guests. If you could just attach this to your right big toe.
Exactly. So it was funny, the end of Cairo, and things were starting to get, tense there. And so this is kind of 2005 to 8, then I was in Iraq, 2008, 9, during the end of what was called the surge. And there was a very, very, a different experience, as well. And to experience what and at least and see what the folks, with the Iraqis themselves were going through and had been going through for some time. And it was just a very, very tough time. And, it was a tough time to be, working the government then too, to see what we've done, what we hadn't done, what we had thought through, what wasn't thought through, what, among many other things, there. And again, I think oftentimes you find yourself, facing that conundrum of, can you make it any better from where you are and on the ground? Can you do it in a micro way? Can you do it at a human level? If you can't do it at a policy level. And I think, sometimes that's where you end up, and you try and do it, make things just a little bit better at a human level, if you can at a policy level, at that stage. But anyway, we wrapped up there. And during that time, my wife and kids, were living in our home in Clare. And, when the assignments officer at the State Department said, kind of, well, where do you want to go next? You're finishing up in Baghdad, where would you like to go? And I said, well, I'd probably like to leave the region for a little while. And they said, where? And I said, well, I'd love to go to Ireland. And, it'd be the nicest, easiest move for the family at this stage, just up the road, and either to Dublin or Belfast. And there was opportunities in both, but I was given the opportunity to go to Belfast, and the opportunity to go to Dublin actually as well. But I took the opportunity to go to Belfast. I would always been intrigued and had some exposure to it in around 1995 when I was working at the American Embassy in Dublin as an intern. It was kind of between the ceasefires and the Good Friday Agreement, and just kind of seeing from that perspective all the stuff that was happening, and had the opportunity to go to Belfast. And so we jumped at that. And that's where we ended up in 2009. And it was funny, landing in Belfast and meeting a lot of folks. And they said, where are you coming from? And I said, Baghdad. They said, well, why are you coming here? I said,
Baghdad to Belfast. That's the chapter of this in your autobiography. That's what the chapter's called.
Yeah. And I said, look, it was 54 degrees when I left Baghdad. And I said, here it's a beautiful soft day, and I see trees and grass and an absence of conflict, frankly, at that time. And, so it was a wonderful move, and that kind of set the stage for everything else. And, just a great time for myself professionally and the family. And, it was a chance to, I still feel, I tell people it's probably the best job in the Foreign Service, where we have in Belfast, we've got a, great local team, fantastic folks, from every corner of Northern Ireland, that really work there every day, and kind of a unique situation in terms of the U.S. where we have a slightly different set of interests, in Northern Ireland, and long-standing interests. And we always remind people, I think those are one of our second or third oldest diplomatic institutions in the world was the U.S. consulate in Belfast. We had trading interests there going back to the founding, nearly the founding of the country, obviously, and given the strong,
Wow.
the strong connections, between Northern Ireland and Ulster, more broadly speaking, and elsewhere in the United States, going back to pre-founding of the U.S. There's just a really unique situation there. And then obviously over the years of U.S. engagement, and support of the political process there, it was just a very unique place and a fantastic place to live, And, sometimes whenever I say that, people roll their eyes and they're like, oh yeah, it might have been for you. But I say, well, I've kind of been around. I've been around a bit, and I can say objectively, this is despite any challenges that you face, you've got a lot going for you there as well, and
Yeah,
and I think sometimes that's lost in the shuffle.
sure. 100%. Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite quotes we said all the time is the grass will always be greener unless you water what is around you.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it takes going away somewhere and exposing yourself to a different environment where you kind of like, oh, okay, this place actually maybe isn't as bad as I thought it was when I was a teenager.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, that was kind of nice actually. What we could do, you forget, you really do. And if you have to put it into context, and I think distance sometimes provides you that context, and you hear that a lot with folks that migrate. They do recognize that. I see a lot of folks coming back. I know, and even in Ireland, where we live in the west of Ireland, a lot of folks in recent years have moved back from the U.S. or from Australia or from Canada, and once they've had kids, and they kind of come back and said, "Yeah, that was great fun, but we miss, we miss our
Yeah.
family, we miss the neighbors, we miss the sense of community, or you miss the filled soda George's Market on the weekend, or whatever it is,
The green grass of
the
home.
green grass of home." There's a lot to be said for that, but so
Mm.
yeah, so that was the environment back there, and great, and we can talk more in detail if you want about the time there, and kind of learnings and things like that. But just to finish that one phase of the story about how we end up in the private sector, as I'd mentioned, the U.S. has had a long tradition going back to George Mitchell, who actually we're very, very proud to have as a senior advisor in Teneo. An incredible man, and I was just back recently for the commemorations in April, and but going back to Senator Mitchell, the U.S. has had a kind of an envoy type position in Northern Ireland, to help support the process there, and Secretary Clinton, I think, in consultation, with lots of different stakeholders, decided, she was going to appoint an envoy, but with a focus on really on the economic side of things, and kind of, how do we supercharge the private sector investment in Northern Ireland and private sector enterprise? How do we build that up? And Declan Kelly had been appointed to that role. He had fantastic history in business and endless energy, and turned himself to that role for 2 years. And I think a lot was accomplished in those 2 years, and a lot for everyone to be proud of, and primarily the folks in Northern Ireland that were able to, kind of really take advantage of, some of the convening opportunities that happened during that time, some of the matchmaking that, private sector at a private sector level that was able to happen at that time, and kind of really drive some investment forward. And it was a lot went into that from all corners. But Declan went back, as I mentioned earlier, to start Teneo, and in 2011, folks will have heard of kind of the Arab Spring. There was a series of uprisings starting in Tunisia, actually, and then in Egypt and elsewhere. It kind of was moving around the region where governments were falling and populations were rising up there. And there were a number of private sector companies that had significant investments in the Middle East, whether across different industries, and they happened to be clients of Teneo. And they were looking for help kind of navigating that situation to make sure that they had the appropriate partnerships, and that they were understanding the geopolitical situation that was going on, and that they were doing what they needed to do to, to manage the business environment there at the time. And, I was coming towards the end of my 3 years in Belfast. I had already been appointed to go to Jerusalem as what they call the political chief, which is the head of the political affairs section there. And the opportunity came through from Teneo to open up a division for them in the Middle East to help those clients that were in the region kind of navigate this highly disrupted and volatile geopolitical environment. So, my wife and I talked about it. I'd had a wonderful career in the Foreign Service at that stage. It was still going pretty well. I was heading into a high profile position, an interesting position. But, again, we felt this was, for whatever reason, we just felt this was a great, right opportunity. And I had really enjoyed working with Declan and the folks that he had, got to know the folks that he had brought in, and got to know a little bit about, the type of work that was being done. And we just felt that was the right time to make that move and into the private sector, go over the wall, if you will, and go there and do something new, do something different. I was terrified.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge gap, particularly because you have this career path.
Yeah.
Maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe more kind of steps ahead in the public sector. You're like, okay, I can see where I can be. And okay, this guy, if I play my cards right, I could end up kind of being where he is, or I could move my way up, blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of step out into the unknown.
And that was it. And I think, again, coming up in a situation and how much I admired my parents in terms of, look, like I said, my father worked nearly 40 years at the same company. You don't give up a good job. If you've got a job, you don't give it up, right? You don't, especially if you have to walk away from a pension, you don't do that. And that's just not, not what you do. So it was kind of funny. One of the biggest apprehensions I had of leaving, aside from leaving my colleagues and others, State Farm was calling my parents and telling them that I was leaving my job in the government, government job, a good job, and it was good for the family and all of that. But we felt it was time to take the opportunity and do something new and different, and challenge ourselves in that way, and that's what we did. So we ended up in, when did I leave? I finished up in Belfast, Good Friday, actually, 2012, and I think landed in Dubai on Easter Monday. And right after that, so didn't really take any break in between, and got working because there was a lot
Crazy.
going on.
Well, I mean, we all have to, I would love if you're ever up in the north, like literally any time, any day, swing by in the studio. I'd love to do a 2-parter where we just talk stories and lessons from all of your career, because they're really rich, they're really valuable. I know you're a craft beer fan, so maybe get a couple of craft beers in and
Absolutely.
and just let the conversation flow. I do, kind of before I ask kind of the closing questions, I know that you have a real heart for the private sector.
Yeah.
And you believe that the private sector is fundamentally important for where we are and perhaps where we're going. So do you maybe just want to take a couple of minutes to share kind of what you think the role the private sector plays, and maybe why more of us should be more excited about?
Well, yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. And I believed it then, I believe it now. I think even the young entrepreneur, program that you were involved in, I mean, I think is absolutely incredible. And they're doing incredible work because, I mean, look, I talked about community. I mean, private sector jobs, they're durable, they're sustainable, particularly small business. I mean, in terms of the private sector economy in Northern Ireland, people talk about the subvention economy, obviously the block grant and the amount of the overall economy that is derived from subvention. But, there's a vibrant small business sector out there. And, I think that an entrepreneurial sector, and again, you look at the history of Northern Ireland, and I'm sure, folks get tired of hearing about it, but you hear about the inventions and you hear about, whether it's Massey Ferguson or whatever it is,
Sure.
the innovations have happened in that, and continue to happen in that economy, whether it's in disease research, cancer research, whether it's in software as a service, whether it's whatever, there's innovations constantly happening, and there's vibrant community-based businesses. And, I think, one story. I mean, for me, seeing, a family be able to have their children stay if they wish to, or come back, to a business, to an employment opportunity in a community is really important. And, inward investment is important. It's very important to Northern Ireland in terms of the jobs that have come in from the corporate sector. But again, those jobs in the communities, whether it's in the food sector, whether it's in whatever it may be, in services, they're durable. They stay. The money goes in the community. The money stays in the community. These are the companies that sponsor the local sports teams. These are the ones that sponsor the bingo, that are involved in local charities, that do all those kinds of things. So to the degree to which you can encourage, private sector, particularly SME level investment, we've just seen it happen all over the world. It pays dividends in a huge way. And I think we were seeing that in Northern Ireland, growing, but there are challenges to that, obviously. And I think that the scale of the subvention economy is a challenge. It creates political challenges as well. And again, we're not going to get into all the other issues around, political trade, those kinds of things. But, I think when people aren't deferential to the politics, right? If they're not deferential to that, and they go and they take those chances, they push out, they are able to avail of the supports that are there, and then the incentives that are there. I think it makes, huge changes in communities. So the degree to which, I know when I was there, I know that my successors and others are still very, very much involved in trying to support private sector enterprise, private sector development, young entrepreneurs, those kinds of things. The more, we did, and actually our former envoy, my former CEO in Teneo, had definitely set up a mentorship program, where recent graduates could go and work, in New York, in Manhattan, top firms in the world, for a year, challenging themselves, pushing themselves beyond any boundaries that they had ever felt, with direct mentoring from the CEO of these companies. It could be big global banks, they could be whatever. And then they come back and they realize, wait, I could do that. I was just anybody else that was there, that had gone to whatever, had grown up in New York or gone to whatever school, and bring that spirit back, and then apply that to local enterprise in Northern Ireland. Again, whether they do it immediately or whether they do it in 5 years, or they work in London for 10 years and come back, it doesn't matter. It's that, that talent is tapped, and that energy is tapped, and an entrepreneurial spirit is tapped. And there's just a ton of examples out there of folks that have done that, and that are doing that, and are doing world beating stuff in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, writ large, that, I think we need to highlight that. And I know you do that on your program, and others try and highlight that. But I think when we see that, it maybe removes some of those psychological barriers to going out there and taking that risk. So, for me, whenever you can develop a good, strong, small to medium enterprise, in a city or in a community, the dividends are huge. So I'm still very keen to support that where I can.
Yeah. And I share this all the time. It feels like nearly every other episode, but one of the big hearts behind the podcast, this is stealing a quote from a woman called Sarah Fryer, an amazing business leader. She's the thing who says, you can't be what you can't see.
Right.
And, the mission for the podcast is, we want people from Northern Ireland to be able to listen to Kevin, who travels around the world and now is the MD of a major consultant firm. Someone who's become an astronaut, someone who's become a CEO, someone who's set up their own craft beer company, to unlock, in the mind, like you talk about. It's like, oh, well, if Kevin can do it, then I could probably figure it out. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Or if Sarah could do it, I'm sure I could even get halfway there.
If I could do it, you definitely, anyone definitely can. Trust me. This is definitely not preordained. No, it's true though. You're absolutely right. And the examples are there. And I know, in Northern Ireland, in Ireland writ large, actually, you don't always want to be the tallest blade of grass, right? And
of course.
But that said, we need to shine some grow lights on the tallest blades of grass so folks can see those examples, and that they can see that those success stories have been developed in all different kinds of situations, political and economic situations, up and down, whatever. success stories have been coming out. And there's a lot of challenges. I'm not Pollyannish about any of that, political, macroeconomic, whatever. The challenges are there, and I fully recognize those. But I think, I just want to commend you and what you're doing, because you are showing the folks that this is happening. You have folks doing some fantastic things. Again, world beating stuff. I mean, absolutely world beating stuff. There are unicorns being developed in Belfast, right now. In tech side, there's, again, world beating, research being done in medical, biomedical, cybersecurity, whatever. I mean, I could go through the list,
Sure.
left, right, and center, of companies that were started in Northern Ireland by people from Northern Ireland that are out there doing incredible things. And I encounter these companies around the world. Like, I just the other day here in Dubai in an engineering firm, and it's funny because we immediately get back to talking about, what's bacon and Fermanagh or whatever. We start talking about, whatever, wherever they're from, it's, and it's going for that matter, right? We get back to talking about hyper-local stuff, but they're leading an engineering firm that is servicing one of the most high-profile companies in the world out here in the region. And they started themselves, they took advantage of the education that exists in Northern Ireland. They took advantage of the work ethic that exists. They took advantage of the network, the diaspora, the connections, that exist around the world. And they made it happen, so I think those opportunities are there. And if we can highlight those, if it gives one person, a bit of a spark to push out the boat a bit, then, that's a great thing.
It's great. One of my podcast philosophies is whenever the guest is dropping absolute fire, just close it, like just land the plane quickly, because it's an inspirational way to end. If I could just ask one final question, kind of maybe it rhymes with a little bit of some of the stuff you've already been sharing. Very simple. If you could go back in time to an 18-year-old version of yourself and you had a couple of minutes of 18-year-old Kevin's time, what sort of things are you saying to him?
After I clapped him around the ears, the collar and said, "Get hold of yourself, buckle down." No, for me, I'd say be not afraid. Be not afraid. I think fear is largely irrational. It's been my biggest challenge is that hesitation. It's always been that hesitation. How's it going to turn out? I want a predetermined outcome all the time. And, if I think about opportunities that were missed in my life, it's because of not managing fear or not managing, worry, and I think what we found, and I'm at the stage, is that, what, don't worry. It's not a whole lot. I mean, there's certain things that you manage and you mitigate the risk, but there's not a whole lot to worry about in terms of most things that we face, so get beyond yourself and kind of manage that fear, step out there, put yourself out of your comfort zone. And you're just going to experience that much more. And I think at 18 in particular, that would have been, absorbing that, and that could be sports, that could be studies, it could be business, it could be going into the school play, it could be whatever the things that you might be nervous about doing. Had I absorbed that lesson earlier, I think I would have been open to even more experiences, there. So I've been very happy with how things have turned out, thank God. But I think an 18-year-old self, don't be anxious. Easy for me to say, but trust me, from having been down the road, don't be anxious, don't be afraid.
Wow. Like, there's so much we didn't get to cover today, and Janya, I would love the chance to do some more of this. I'm going to kick myself if I don't ask this. So this is purely so I'm not going home on the bus today, and I don't get to kind of close this loop in my head. Your favorite quote: "Put the nets into the deep." I'll butcher the Latin. I don't know if you can give us the Latin.
Duc in altum. Yeah, it's in Latin, it's biblical reference, and cast your nets. And I won't go into the context around it at the time, but really it's about trust me, get out there, go deeper than you've gone before, and drop the nets and see what comes up. I don't care whether you've tried it before. I don't care whether you did it all last night and nothing happened. Do it again. Don't hug the shore. And I think, I could have, any opportunity, we all have opportunities to stay close to shore, stay in our comfort zone. But I think this one is get out there, have faith, get out there and have faith in yourself or whatever that may be. The universe, whatever your personal,
Labor is.
compass needle, wherever it's pointing you, have faith in that, but go out there and do it, push out. And, that's what I have to remind myself when I feel myself wanting to kind of grab the edge of the pool, kind of skirt around the edge of the pool there. We need to do that.
Wow. Don't hug the shore. Kevin, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate it, Matt, and best of luck with the podcast. And hopefully we'll see you in Belfast soon. Definitely craft beer is in order. You got a fantastic scene brewing up there, all over Northern Ireland. Good, small, local businesses, by the way. I hope people can support them.
Amazing stuff. Just want to give one final thanks to NI Connections for making today's episode possible. You can sign up for their free email newsletter at niconnections.com, where you'll get straight to your inbox interesting stories from people who are from this place but are living and working overseas. You'll also get some really interesting insider information about best practices of how to move back home or how to start a business here and all this other really, really interesting stuff. niconnections.com is the place to do that. And we're so, so grateful that we're able to keep this series going thanks to NI Connections support. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Cheers.